a promise so sweet. Yeah, your word is etched on my heart, and there's nothing that can wipe away these permanent marks. Oh, I put all of my plans in your heavenly hands. Oh, your cause is my own. Yeah, your world is my home. I put all of my plans in your heavenly hands. Oh, your cause is my own. Yeah, your world is my home. You're the fire inside my bones. Oh, I'm burning with a purpose, aligned with your own. Oh, oh, and your will is etched in the stars, shining light into the darkness and into my heart. Oh, I put all of my plans in your heavenly hands. Oh, your cause is my own. Yeah, your world. Oh, I put all of my plans, oh Lord, in your heavenly hands. Oh, your cause is my own. Yeah, your world is my home. Through the highs and the lows, oh, I give you control. It's so easy to see that my destiny is yours. Every rise, every fall, yeah, I'm giving it all. 'Cause heaven is near, and Lord, I can hear you call. Come on, let's sing this day. I put all, say, in your heavenly, oh, your cause, Lord. Yeah, your word. Oh, I put all of my plans in your heavenly, oh, your cause, Lord, is my own. Oh, I put all of my plans in your heavenly, oh, your cause, Lord, your word. Oh, I put all of my plans, oh Lord, in your heavenly hands. Oh, your cause is my own. Yeah, your word is my own.
How many of y'all know Vincent Van Gogh? How many of you know his relatives? You don't know his relatives? Why don't you know his relatives? Maybe because you didn't have a relationship with Vincent Van Gogh. Because you didn't have a relationship with him, you don't know him. So let me introduce you to a few of Vincent Van Gogh's relatives. He had his obnoxious brother, please go. He had a very dizzy aunt, vertigo. He had a prune-loving brother, gotta go. He had a convenience store owner cousin, stop and go. Had a ballroom dancer aunt, tango. His nephew was a psychoanalyst, ego. He had a fruit-loving cousin, mango. He had a sister who loved disco, go-go. And he had a bouncy little nephew, pogo. And last but not least, his constipated uncle, can't go. So it's hard to know people's family, right, if we don't fellowship together. How would you be expected to know Vincent Van Gogh's family if we didn't fellowship with him, right? Brother Brian, he's dead. He's been dead for quite a while. Yes, he is. But that's not my point. So the past few weeks, what had Pastor been talking about? You know there's going to be a quiz today, right? Love, all right, 4-letter word. Did you know love is a choice? Everybody's, oh no, it's a feeling, Brother Brian. I can tell you it's a choice because if it wasn't a choice, God wouldn't have made it a commandment. A lot of times we confuse emotions for love. Love is doing things for people when you're not asked, doing them because it needs to be done, thinking about them when nobody else is thinking about it. That's what love is, right? So John 13:34 and 35, Pastor gave this, so he was talking about love, right? A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I loved you, that you also love one another. By this shall all men know that you're my disciples, if you have love one to another. Remember, we were talking about faith, right? And faith demands what? Action, right? So if you get a command of love, well, you have to have action, right? You got to love others, right? And you see here that Jesus was even saying this in verse 35, by this shall all men know that you are my disciples, by the love you're showing you. And so that's the thing. If we have faith in God and all that, we ought to be showing that love to others, right? So, how many remember back when you were in school? You remember science class? So in science class, I told you about a whole bunch of stuff, right? And how many people, I remember the story that our science teacher talked about sodium, the metal sodium. Anybody know where I'm going? What happens when you put sodium in water? It has, no, that's NaCl. I'm talking about sodium metal. It has a violent reaction. It turns to white fire and all that in the water. So you can't pour water on it to put it out. It's a cool reaction. I remember she had one of these glass, it was probably plexiglass enclosed things. She took it with tongs, had big gloves on, a face shield. She put it in the water, closed that thing down, and that thing started going off. And then she told us a story. She said, that's a pretty cool reaction, isn't it? Let me tell you a story, though. One of my students one time thought it was such a cool reaction that they borrowed a little bit of that sodium, put it in their pocket. Later that day, got a little warmer. What happens when it gets warm? So they got little hot britches. So she was telling us that so that, hey, somebody don't grab this and the same thing happen again. But the thing is, what did you call that in science? You would learn about these things. They'd tell you the principles of chemical reactions and everything else. But what would you have after you got the book learning? You had the lab. Everybody loves going to the lab with the doctor, right? Well, guess what? Next Sunday, we're going to have a lab. What are you talking about? Pastor's been talking about love for a few weeks. What is that fellowship about? So we're going to have the lab. We got the book learning, and now it's time to go to the lab to experience that. Now the thing is, what happens is we're all called to do this, and we can do it outside of here, right? You know, to the world, right? We can show love to the world. But the thing is, next Sunday, what we do is we have the opportunity to do it with family and friends, which is a lot less anxious and everything else, because you're not going to get, hey, I'm worried I'm going to say the wrong thing or do this or do that. You're just going to be in this comfortable environment and everything else, working out these principles. But what happens if I love somebody? They love me back. They see God's reflection in me. And so that's what this fellowship is. It's going to be the lab. You know, a lot of times when you hear lab, it kind of sounds scary, right? But the thing is, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a lab, right? So let me see here where I'm at. The other thing that you're going to find is you're going to get to know people. You're going to learn their relatives' names like Can't Go. And of course, it may be really hard to find the Can't Go people that didn't show up to the fellowship, right? So you can't learn about them, right? But the thing is, you're going to learn more about them. And then what's going to happen is those people will become real to you. And what do I mean? It's like, hey, you know some people, you know their name, and they become superficial. But the more you know somebody, the more you respond to news about that person. And when it comes time to pray, what's going to happen? If you know somebody, if you hear somebody, hey, somebody was in a car accident, please pray for them. But I'm saying you hear it on the news, right? And or somebody gets up here and says, hey, Billy Bob's third cousin on his fourth side that you don't even know, never seen, his aunt died or was hurt in a car crash, please pray for him. Well, you may say you pray for him, and maybe you do, maybe you don't. You know, sometimes you forget. That's why I'm always a big proponent of praying right then. That way, if I do forget, I have prayed. You can always pray again, so that's not. So, but what I'm saying is, if you know who you're praying for, then you pray with a different earnestness. It means something to you. If I hear Lamarcus, his mom is hurting, of course I know both of them, right? And so I can pray, but I know he really cares for his mom, and so I sit there and know, hey, it hurts him a lot that she's sick and all that. So I sit there and say, hey, I'm really going to pray in earnest instead of just saying, okay, Lord, please heal that person, and then moving on. You're sitting there thinking about that person, right? And then the other thing is, depending on what kind of state it is, you may say, well, hey, can I get them a meal and bring it by their house or something like that? Because are you going to do it for that person you didn't know? But you will for somebody you do, right? And so what happens is when you start fellowshipping with them, people become real people to you with real consequences. Because a lot of times you say, you feel like there's no real consequences. Hey, if I don't pray for this person or don't act on their behalf or anything like that. But as you get to know them, then it becomes, hey, these are real people, and I realize stuff's going. If I don't pray for them, maybe nobody else does. You start sitting there and saying, hey, I'm going to stand up for this person because maybe they could. I asked somebody to come down here so I could pray for Sister Shelley. She's under the weather. She's not here, but so we've had somebody stand in their proxy. I saw Brother Dennis down here. I assume he's having somebody praying for Linda. So the thing is, that they're loved ones and we care about them, and so we're having somebody stand in and pray for them. But if you don't really love them, you don't really sit there and care if somebody prayed for them or not. Hey, whatever. And so that's what this fellowship does. It allows us to grow together and get ties to each other, so it becomes real. The other thing is it comes into testimony. Because what happens is there's a lot of answered prayers in this congregation. But a lot of times you don't know them. And so people start talking and sharing their experiences, and then the next thing you know is, wow, I didn't know that. God is moving. You know, and so stuff like, oh, well, if God could do that for them, maybe he can do this for me. And then the other thing is, if they survived that, I can survive that. You know, because a lot of times people go through stuff. A lot of times we don't share a lot of the rough things we go through. A lot of times there's a lot of hurt in that, right? But the thing is, all things work towards the good for those that love the Lord and called according to his purpose. A lot of that I sit there and see is a lot of times we go through things so that we can be a testimony for others to say, you can make it through. God helped me through some bad things. You know, hey, I'll give you an instance. I haven't told anybody about this. Kimberly doesn't even know. The day we were going to celebrate her graduation, I was getting moved to a new job. They came to me like this and said, hey, boom, we need you to write this quick job description, and you're moving to this other job, which I was in a team lead position, and then I was going to an individual contributor position, and I was like, man, this seems weird. As a team lead, you could always get things HR. So I start going through, did somebody complain to HR? Normally HR will come and tell you if there's some kind of issue that you did wrong. But they said, I started going into, are they trying to protect me, move me into this other job so they don't have to fire me? Am I on the way out the door, so to speak? This is the last chance. And I'm sitting there, and of course, I'm not sharing this with anybody because I believe God is able to take care of it. Plus, it's Kimberly's graduation. I'm not going to go to that and bring that up, so I didn't tell Tammy about it. I didn't tell Kimberly about it. But I'm sitting there at that graduation. I'm sitting there going, yay, man, this is great, you know. But I'm sitting there walking through it. And so I'm praying about it and everything else, and, you know, I'm still working there. And it goes back to miscommunication. Just to make a long story short, because I went to somebody else and I said, hey, I don't know if I'm on the way out here, you know, or not. And he said, well, do you remember when the technology manager, which he was two bosses above my boss, talked to you and asked if you would help? And I said, yeah. I said, wait till after the turnaround and I get freed up and I can help. Well, I thought when she asked for the help, hey, continue to do your job, but go do these things else. He said, she meant that you were going to go take this job. That was what, I was like, nobody even told me that. I was like, everybody around me, they were changing all these job positions, everything else. And I'm just going out here in left field. And of course, I joked with them because the new manager was taking over at the time. They moved me to a trailer out by the gate, which is a pretty big plant. And I'm sitting there going, so they're moving me towards the gate, so it's not that far to just leave. And so I told the new manager, I said, well, when you moved me out by the gate, I figured you didn't like me. But then when you moved this other worker out there with me, then I knew you didn't like me. And so that being said, I don't need to mention any names, and you wouldn't know them anyway, hopefully. But what I'm saying is, yeah, there's people I don't like, but I still love them. But the thing is, I lived through that, and I put my trust in the Lord and everything else, and I walked through that, right? And we overcome by what? By our testimony. hmm And so the thing is, none of y'all probably knew that because I didn't tell anybody. But if you fellowship with me, maybe I tell you these stories, maybe I don't, right? How many knew that story a couple weeks ago when I talked about Tammy's pregnancy? You know, most people die from that, and you sit there and say, well, that's a horrible thing and all that. But what I talked about was the provision that we had through that, which a lot of times you don't realize God's provision because you're going through this stuff, and that doesn't look like provision because you're expecting God to do this wonderful thing, and you don't see his provision. God sits there and goes, no, it's all going to work out. And you got to get perspective sometimes to see that. That's the other thing is, if you talk with older people that have been through it and stuff, a lot of times they sit there and say, hey, this too will pass. Yeah, it's going to be a struggle for a little while, but then it's going to go away. So the part of that fellowship is you got other people to lean on to sit there and say, I know it's tough right now, but God, he will get you through, and he will make a way of escape. And that's what you get from fellowship. You know, the Scripture says, forsake not the assembly of yourselves, right? There's a reason for that. I can watch all this stuff on TV. I can watch it on the internet. What does social media do for you? It actually isolates you. And the other thing, you know what social media does? Very rarely does anybody put their struggles on social media. What they do is they show you this wonderful picture on vacation with this wonderful meal, but what you don't see is, well, after that wonderful meal, everybody got sick because there was something bad in it, and they were puking on the rest of the cruise or whatever. You know what I'm saying? They just show you the beautiful stuff. But when you start fellowshipping with somebody, you start to say, yeah, they struggle too. You know, everybody says, hey, you sit up there in a tie and a nice shirt, you don't go through any struggles. You don't understand what I've been through. Maybe I haven't gone through some struggles you have. Maybe I've gone through worse. It's different, but what I'm saying is I can still put my trust in God, and I can tell you how I got through that. And sometimes it's like Peter stepping out of the boat to walk on water. You got to take your eyes off the waves and just look at Jesus and trust that Jesus is going to catch you. So what we're looking for is, and I'll let you put this one up, Acts 2:42 through 47. So after Pentecost, right, they had all the fire come down, right? The Holy Spirit came down, and it was a wonderful time, right? There was a lot of people saved. There's signs and wonders. What happened after that? Starting in verse 42. I'll use my glasses so I use the same. So, and they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship and breaking of bread and prayers. Go back to that. So they continued steadfastly in apostles' doctrine and what? Fellowship. That's our lab class, right? And breaking of bread. What are we going to be doing? We're going to be breaking some brisket. Something like that anyway. Breaking some barbecue. And so that's what we're going to be doing. And in prayers. What happened? There might even be a few prayers said at that fellowship. We're going to pray for the food. Even though we know it's good, we're going to bless it, right? Go on, next verse. And fear came upon every soul, and many signs and wonders were done by the apostles. When you start doing that thing and acting on what God does, remember we were talking about faith. When you put faith in motion, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So once you start putting your faith in God and trusting in Him and all that, what happens is even at the fellowship you can say, hey man, let me pray for you. And then stuff starts happening. Maybe it happens then, maybe it happens a few days from now. Then you start getting testimonies, right? Let's go on to the next verse. And all that believed were together and had what? All things in common. So in other words, everybody kind of knew stuff, right? Knew about each other, knew each other. Keep going. And they sold their possessions and goods and parted them to all men as every man had need. Now, Brother Brian, are you saying I got to sell everything I have? No, I'm not. What I'm saying is, because they knew everybody and had fellowship, they knew the needs that were among them. And so they could respond. If you stay at home and watch the service on the internet, how is anybody here going to know you're struggling? And so the thing is, what happens is when you fellowship together and stuff, it came out, and a lot of people don't want to show that they're struggling, right? You know, to get to know somebody enough, you got to show your vulnerabilities and all, and that's hard to do, isn't it? You know, is it good for me to come up here and tell you I thought my job was on the line? They laughed when they thought that's what I thought was happening. It was real in my life. But, you know, but the thing is, so sometimes you can get past something, you can laugh about it after the fact, right? But it's not very funny while it's going on. And so when we fellowship, we get to know each other and we can know their needs and we can reach out to them. I'll give an example. I think it's okay. Don't know all the details of it. Vonda's car was in a wreck, and they were going to try to fix it. And it turned out the people that were going to fix it decided to give her a car. It looked like it was a Jeep or something like that. Looked like it was pretty good condition and all that. So rather than fix the car, what happens, and that car had flipped over. I don't know how bad it looked because I hadn't seen any pictures, but I'm sure it looked pretty bad if it flipped over. So she got another car out of it. If nobody knew that it happened, there's a lot of people in here didn't know Vonda was in a car accident, did they? And so the thing is, if you don't know, how can you pray? How can you act? But what happens is you have these fellowships and everything else. That's when you get to learn people and know what's going on, right? Let's keep going. And they continuing daily with one accord in the temple. One accord means of the same mind and the same effort. Seek ye first what? The kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. So what they were doing, it was all about kingdom. So they were in one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house. They did eat their meat with what? Gladness and singleness of heart. And so the thing is, hey, that's what we're going to do in lab class, right? And I think it's 47 was the last one. So they were praising God and having favor with what? So that's interesting. They started having favor with all the people. So what happens is you get to know everybody and stuff, and they know your issues and stuff. It's, hey, my son lost his job and all this. And you say, well, hey, so-and-so's hiring over here. Or, hey, I can put a word in for him or blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, they got a job, right? So you have favor with what? All the people. And the Lord added to the church daily as should be saved. So what happens is you get in these fellowships, and then people bring friends and everything else. And what happens is a lot of people see Christians as hypocrites, which we are. We say we love everybody. Well, at least maybe I am. I don't know, maybe some of y'all aren't. I'm not saying the person that's on your row, but I mean not you, but somebody else on your row is a hypocrite. And so the thing is, we all sin and fall short of the glory of God, right? But we are forgiven, right? And so what happens is, you know, sometimes people put you on that pedestal and say, hey, you say you're a Christian, but look at the life you live. Well, hey, I'm still struggling. And so the thing is, I'm going to overcome by the word of my testimony. How are you going to get my testimony? By fellowshipping with me. And so what are we going to do in our lab? You ready? Here comes point number 1. It's not eat. Some of these you're going to have to figure out on your own. So number 1, what has Pastor been teaching on? So what's our number 1 point? Show love. So what we're going to do in our lab is show love. We'll show love of that barbecue. So John 13:34 through 35 again. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this shall all men know that you're my disciples, if you have love one to another. So they're going to know you're a Christian by your love. What are they going to look at? How are you going to know the barbecue is good? It smells good. They're not going to be sniffing you because you may not smell good depending on how hot it is, right? But what they're going to do is they're going to see you loving other people, right? They're going to see the evidence of your faith, the substance of things hoped for, right? The evidence of things not seen. So, 1 Thessalonians 2:8 in the Amplified. Can you put that one up? Do you have Amplified or you got Classic or which? I'll tell you to. Just listen to this. Is 1 Thessalonians 2:8. It says, having such a deep affection for you, we were delighted to share with you not only God's good news, but also our own lives, because you had become so very dear to us. So did you catch that? Having such a deep affection for you, we were delighted to share with you not only God's good news, but what? Also our own lives. So you see up there, for you had become so dear to us. So in other words, through fellowship, we can become dear to one another, and people will get to where they will share their life with you. They will sacrifice some. You have to sacrifice some of you and what you want to do to bless others. And so what happens is you become so acquainted and people come so dear to you that's what's going to happen is you're going to want to do things for them. Point number 2, you're going to sharpen each other. How many people in here realize they're not the sharpest marble in the drawer? Put up Proverbs 27:17. He's got it up. Iron sharpens iron. So a man sharpens the countenance of what? So can you sharpen somebody else if you don't show up to the fellowship? What's going to happen? Iron rusts. When you rub iron against iron, you're going to brush some of that rust off, aren't you? You're going to sharpen that iron up, right? You're going to help each other get sharp. And so that's what we're going to do in the lab class, right? We're going to sharpen iron. So iron sharpening iron at least implies that there's two. Believe it or not, you've got to have 2 people at least to have a fellowship. Can't do it by yourself. You can have a real good meal, you can make something real decorated and everything else, but you can't have a fellowship with one person. It'd be impossible for one tool to become sharper without the presence of the other. So we can't get any sharper without the presence of each other. We need each other, believe it or not. Left isolated, both blades will be dull and quite useless. Also, iron sharpening iron also requires a level of accountability. That's a big word and a nasty word, right? Nobody wants to be accountable. That sounds like I'm in trouble. So accountability, or allowing others to look close enough into our lives so that they can see a specific weakness or problem area. You capture that? Allowing somebody to see inside you enough to show your vulnerabilities. That's a hard thing to do sometimes, isn't it? But the thing is, that's how you know how to pray for people and how important it is, right? We need close relationships with other people we trust and respect to give them the consent to identify weak areas of our lives and then address those areas with us. So what I'm not saying is, so Brother Brian, what you did is you've given me license to go around the fellowship and say, Sister Janet, I've noticed this about you, and this is what you need to work on. In fact, I wrote a list, and I got it at home. It's 5 pages, but hey, if you wait, I got it in the car. I made it because I knew I was going to see you here, and I brought it. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying we're going to go to Christina and do that. No. But no, that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is if you truly love somebody, you sit there and say you get that comfort level, then you can open up and let those vulnerabilities show. And say, hey, can you help me with this, right? And so the principle of accountability is when helpful and real conversations grow out of growing, loving, and constructive relationships. And so what we're doing, we're saying you got to get to know somebody before you trust them, right? And that's what your fellowship's about. You get to know people so you can trust them, right? Number 3, provoke each other. First thing I'm going to do when I show up is punch LaMarcus in the nose. Remember I said that every action causes an equal and opposite reaction? Unfortunately, I think when I punch him in the nose, there's going to be more than an equal reaction. Provoke each other. What in the world is he talking about? Let's put up Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. Let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembly of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another so much the more as you see the day approaching. So what we're doing is we're provoking each other to good works. And you know what could happen is say, hey, Julius, I saw this person over here, their fence is kind of coming down and all this widow. What do you say you got some time this weekend? Why don't we get together and we'll go over there and fix that fence up? What you're doing is you're provoking them to love. And the other thing is you might see a kid running around here doing something they shouldn't be doing or whatever, and you sit there and say, maybe they're retaliating for something that happened to them, and say, well, hey, I know your instant reaction is hit Brother Brian after he punched LaMarcus in the nose. But what we need to do is show him love. Well, I'd really love to punch him back. I'll show him that love, right? But we got to provoke each other, right, to good works. That's what God expects from us. So we do not just put in our time just to make a show of appearance. Our faith is not a ritual. It must have substance. And so what happens is, once again, I'm saying faith demands action, right? And if there isn't any action, then we got to say, where's our faith? You know, faith without works is dead, right? So that when we talk about this, what it says in the scripture, it says, consider one another. When that verse says consider, here's the Hebrew, or the Greek, I should say. It's hard for me to pronounce it. So kat on oyo. Kat on oyo is the word for consider that they use. It means to observe fully, to perceive, to behold, to discover, to know them. It means to get into the lives of others, to be caring and giving of ourselves by heart-to-heart encounters. So when we're considering one another to provoke them to love, it's not just a superficial thing that, hey, I just sort of know him, blah, blah, blah. What you do is you get in there and you actually consider that person and say, how can I provoke him to love in this situation? And so you got to take time to get to know that person, right? And that takes some of that time, but the thing is, they get to know you, you get to know them, and then you come stronger together, right? What do you learn about ropes? Which is stronger, a single strand or two or three wrapped around together? They become stronger, don't they, when it's together? The only thing is you don't want to tie it in a knot, right? Get all knotted up, it's easier to break. So if you get yourself all knotted up, that's a bonus point. You didn't even get that. So we want to provoke one another. And guess what? We can't do that if we're not getting together in fellowship. And I think I'm going to get to a closing point here. I'm going to give y'all some time back. I will encourage you to read Romans 12. I may grab a few points out of here. The whole of Romans chapter 12 basically is how should you live your life. I'll read the first two verses to you real quick. It said, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And so what happens is you're presenting your body as a living sacrifice. What you're saying is, what does that mean? What happens, that this is, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and then all these things will be added unto you. What happens is when you're making yourself a living sacrifice, you sit there and say, God, I know you want to further your kingdom. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to sacrifice myself. What am I doing? What I'm saying is I'm going to honor what you want done before I honor what I want done. That's what you're saying you're going to do. You're going to say, I'm going to put you before me. So what you're saying is, God, I'm going to put you. And if God's command is love, then what that means is actually I'm going to put others before I put me, right? I had something I wanted to do next Sunday. I didn't want to go to the fellowship. But no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put others. Going to the fellowship, how many people in here might think going to the fellowship is just about whether it doesn't mean anything if I don't show up? But if you start thinking about if you don't show up, then you're not there to interact with others and be a blessing to others and everything else. What happens is when you don't show up, it doesn't just affect you. It affects those other people that didn't get to interact with you. What I'm trying to tell you is you're a blessing, believe it or not. And people will miss out on something if you don't show up. You will miss out too, because the thing is they can be a blessing to you as also, because we saw before, give and it shall be given unto you, right? And then the second verse, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove that which is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So what you have to do, remember I said Romans 12 is about how you live your life, right? Spend some time, read the whole chapter. But be not conformed to this world. The world's going to tell you all these things, and you've got to get your mind renewed. You get your mind renewed by being in the Word of God and being around people that live their life based on His Word. And that's how you renew your mind. Because if you sit there and watch the news, you're going to get all wound up by everything else. You're going to get all knotted up, and that rope's going to break. They're going to tell you how inflation's so bad, and if you do it by the real numbers that are not even talking to you, it's worse than you think it is. But then if you go back and say, well, God's provision doesn't always show up. Gas prices went up close to $5, and I was still able to get back and forth to work, wasn't I? God must have been helping provide, huh? You know, a lot of times we don't see it. The raven was bringing you food, but you weren't eating. You might have been eating at McDonald's instead of the steakhouse, but you're still eating, right? The other thing it talks to you in Romans 12, it says, don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to. And so, you know, you're supposed to esteem people more highly than yourself and all that. You get stuck on yourself, you know, pretty soon the only fan clout group you're going to get is yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And then who's going to help you? If you're all that in a bag of chips, you can help yourself, brother. So we need to be ready to sacrifice, not only chasing our own desires. And the thing is, it's more blessed to give than to. A lot of times what you find out is you get a lot more pleasure out of doing that then if you're only receiving, all those stars in Hollywood would be a lot happier than they would be if they thought it was all, they're receiving all these accolades and everything else, but how many of them are really happy? How many sports stars are super happy? Got the $160 million contract or something like that? But they ain't happy, are they? And so the thing is, if you sit there and put your desires in God, he said, then he'll give you the desires, delight yourself in the Lord, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. If you take care of his kingdom, he's going to take care of you. And so Romans 12 also goes, I'm just going to paraphrase, Romans 12 talks about we're all members of the same body. So you work together. Not everybody has the same job. Somebody's an eyeball, somebody's an ear, and somebody's the behind. If you don't have a behind, you can't sit down. And if they're related to Vincent van Gogh, everybody's going to be miserable when they can't go. So, you don't think, oh, hey, I esteem myself more than them because they're the behind. But shoot, when you got hemorrhoids, everybody's going to know about it, right? Everybody's miserable. I'm just seeing if you're still awake, brother. I said, what I was trying to say is there's an opening for a hemorrhoid. No, that was just a joke. I'm just saying, what I'm saying is don't esteem yourself higher than others. Just because you're not the behind, you think you're better than them. That's not the case, right? They have a very important job, and we'll all be miserable if they're not there. The last thing it talks about, the last verse of Romans 12, verse 21, says, be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. What does that mean? That evil hits your mind so much that, like when I said I was going to pop Botley in the nose, he if he's overcome by evil, says, I'm going to retaliate, and it ain't going to be enough that I give equal. It's going to be I got to do more. But if I get to a point where I say, hey, I realize he's hurting. That's why he popped me in the nose. I need to love on him and find out what's the matter. How many times do you see a kid acting out and all you want to do is discipline them? But if you took a little bit of time to find out what's going on, you're going to find they're hurting and they're just acting out because they don't know what to do. So what happens is then you aren't overcome by evil. You overcome evil with good. And so, what are we going to do next Sunday? I heard you said eat. I know. We're going to love the barbecue. We're going to love. Point one, we're going to love, right? What's point number 2? We're going to sharpen each other so we can stab each other in the back, Brother Brian. And number 3, we're going to provoke each other for good. We're not going to, and so can we have a fellowship without each other? So, how many people are ready for lab? I'm hungry too, so I'm ready for lab too. Stand up.